you. So just begin with Westchester. So it's always a pleasure to come here. And I get here more than just on campus visits. I was here actually just after we got back from the break to participate in a fun day that Zeb and Lori put on for the RAMP program for students who are, in that murky middle, and sort of giving them some love and attention to help them continue to achieve and to progress, and it's super exciting. And it's just the energy and the vibrancy and the tremendous successes that Westchester has had. It just shows up in every single way, both in terms of the numbers, and I'm a big numbers guy, but it also shows up in just the quality of the discourse on the campus and the sense of the tone and the camaraderie that folks show. It's really, there is something really special here. I know you know that, but I want you to know that I also know that. It's important for me that you know that I know that. It's widely recognized, and it's tremendously exciting for you, and it's tremendous for the people of the region that you serve, but also for the state of Pennsylvania. So that's thing one. Thing two, let me just quickly, where I believe we are as a system. And where we are as a system and where Westchester are very different places, and so it's important to keep that in mind. I don't think that our challenges are have been any secret. I mean, they've been written about forever. I think the NCHEMS report was in 2016, so that's 4 years ago, and they weren't wrong. And then the RAND folks who use the same data also weren't wrong. We're pretty challenging position financially, and it's only gotten worse over time because for a variety of reasons that we can all speculate about, and it's interesting seminar conversation and PhD topic about why the universities as a collective just continue to fail to address these challenges over time, but they've accumulated. One of the things I did when I first got here was to recognize, partly in conversation with presidents and many others, that our budgeting processes were completely opaque. It just, made it very difficult for anybody. It was really interesting to have conversations with, leaders of our collective bargaining units who are adamant that, our budgeting processes were opaque, and then to have the same conversations with the presidents who are adamant that our budgeting processes were opaque, and then the board. And so there's some consistency in that kind of narrative. And so we spent a lot of time putting budgeting processes together that were not opaque, and it wasn't, I don't think people were, I always assume good intent. I don't think people were there was no malintent, just, we were 14 different universities, we did things differently, and there was no real urgency in aligning the way we did business. So, so it was really impossible to get a very good sense, general sense of where we were, but not a very good sense. So we did a couple things over the last year to align our budgeting. We invited our presidents as part of the annual budget process to develop multi-year budgets for their universities, and to use a common methodology, to use common approaches, et cetera. And we did a number of things differently. The most important one was we said, do this over a 3-year period and balance your budgets. So in the past, we'd said, just tell us what you think, tell us what you cost next year and what you have, and then give us an estimate of what you need to make up the difference, which isn't really budgeting, it's just an interesting exercise. So we received those budgets in the normal way sometime in the fall, and the vice presidents for administration and finance got together and reviewed them. And I think, I'll forgive the colloquial expression, I think they scared the crap out of each other, bluntly. And I know that I was not in the room. I know that because the startle response drifted into my office, which was a couple floors above where they were meeting. Because I think what they were facing, I don't remember the exact numbers, but when they looked at the numbers, it was something like, over the next several years, they were anticipating that our system-wide reserves were going to be drawn down by another couple $100 million, and that the total net additional debt that we would experience because universities would run out of reserves and then go into the red to make payroll was something like $138 million. It was some ridiculous number. And it was a bad day because Sharon didn't know this at the time. Maybe she did. But I had my monthly meeting with the governor in the afternoon. You don't want to walk in. I wasn't startled, just so you know. I wasn't totally startled by the number. I knew we were in pretty serious shape. I was startled by the timing. I'll just be honest about that. I assumed that was a year or so out. And in fact, I had started my journey as a change leader in this system and you'll remember this, I started on culture and shared governance and data transparency. And I did that for a reason, because I knew that we were going to hit this, because I could see enough of the trend line, or at least I thought I did, that I knew that we were going to have to make very difficult choices at some point a couple years out. And I wanted to put in place I wanted to strengthen our organizational culture. And it was never such an issue here at Westchester, because I think groups work well together. And, I know there's challenges, but there are other universities which have them more deeply. And the whole work on shared governance was to put the structures in place and get the culture beginning to move in a way that we were better able to make difficult decisions. And the numbers got ahead of us. So anyway, $138 million, that was the number then. So then we entered into the sustainability planning process. 9 universities were required to come up with a 5-year sustainability plan. How are they going to balance their budgets in 5 years, basically? And those got together. We got together around those in January. And the number it gets better, right? Because the more you look into it, the more you realize there's a problem, the harder you try to figure out how to get out of the situation. And so the number that came out of the sustainability planning process was $80 million, right? That would mean that a number of universities would draw down on their unrestricted assets, their reserves, and run into the red to the tune of $80 million. And so you get a bunch of presidents together with me sitting around looking at this stuff. What does $80 million mean? Well, where do you get that money? We pay for it ourselves. There's only 2 ways to do it. You take it off the top in the allocation, you distribute it. Or you write a loan, bluntly, which will probably never be paid back. Why? Not because universities are bad, they're just not profit centers. That's a good thing. So if you're a university and you've got 10, 15, 20, $25 million in debt, do it for Westchester. I mean, I can't do the math in my head, but if you had a $25 million debt, how many more students would you need to enroll to pay that debt down over a 10 or 15 or 20-year period? It's $1 million per 100 students. So, and then if you're a smaller university operating much less efficiency than Westchester, the numbers are worse. So you get together and you look at that and you think, this is unacceptable. I mean, Westchester's portion of that, I had the number in my head and I forgot it, but it's about 10 plus million, is that right? It's 10 plus, so we would, in some way, shape, or form, if we were to accept that level of debt, we would take 10 plus million from Westchester over the next 4 or 5 years. Allocated elsewhere. It's not acceptable. It just isn't. And it wasn't acceptable to, I think, any of the presidents in the room. And I think it was a pretty interesting, it was actually a day that, I have to admit, spare Chris's blushes, kind of gave me, goosebumps, because it was the first time this whole thing about the sharing system was designed and talked about for a reason. And I think we experienced that reason collectively, whenever that was, on the 12th or in February when we met around the sustainability plans, because we realized that the model that we had pursued so successfully for 100 plus years, 120 plus years, each tub on its own bottom, didn't work anymore for at least several of our universities. That their scale of operations was simply too small. And you know what happens in universities, right? As the budgets get curtailed, programs eventually as enrollments drop, you have to eventually curtail your academic program, which means your enrollments drop more and you fall into this vicious cycle. It's a death spiral. And there's this sort of when you're staring these kind of numbers in the face, there's this recognition that won't work. That we're going to have to think, that sharing system, we're going to have to think, if we go back to those sustainability plans and take seriously that notion of sharing, can we get a better result? And so that's where we are. I mean, basically, okay, those plans, threw those out. And the memo that I wrote was just instruction to the presidents, directive to the presidents to do a bunch of things. One of them was, we think about utilization of our talented faculty within our university environment, and we sort of make decisions, presidents do, about the use of permanent adjunct faculty in a way that makes sense within their budgets. It's a great thing. Under these circumstances, it doesn't work for a bunch of our schools. They have reached a point where they have to draw differently on talent, and they have to think more broadly. So what happens if we think collectively about that problem, which has always been one that was contained within a single university? The second thing had to do with low-enrolled programs. Low-enrolled programs are a feature of the landscape in higher education. They're really important for a whole bunch of good reasons. And it doesn't really matter as long as the low-enrolled programs which are losing money are somehow balanced by the other programs which are not losing money. And it's the way that universities and presidents have for years enabled general education. Because you can't have everything will not be profitable. But we're not in this business for profitability. We're in this business to educate people. But at certain scale, there's no longer enough of an opportunity. The math doesn't work. Not at Westchester, but at other schools. And so we said, okay, what happens if we look at that problem now through a collectivist lens? What happens if we try at a system level to do what universities and university presidents have been doing for decades, hundreds of years? Make those trade-offs, those balancing decisions. We asked ourselves about staff and executive, in particular, level staff. Are there opportunities for consolidation? It's really important. I'm going to say a name of a role, and the person who is, if they're in the room in this role, should not freak out, because I'm just plucking an illustrative example out of the sky. Is it true that every university needs a director of X? All right, I saved myself. I don't know. We have for hundreds of years always had a director of X or a vice president for Y or a dean of Z. Is that absolutely necessary? Is it possible to consolidate roles? Are there benefits from consolidating roles? It might make a more exciting, interesting job. So that was thrown in the mix as well. So the idea is to go back to the sustainability plans and think seriously about, could we take that $80 million number and compress it a lot so that we don't have to, we're not going to get it compressed as, well, I'd love to say we're going to compress it to zero. That's not going to happen. But can we get it down a lot? And then I have to admit, and then I'm going to stop, that we struggled with, should we assign targets, right? Because it's hard to just, for a president to go back and say, let's see if we can do better. It's easier to go towards a target. So we struggled with that. And we realized that any target would be kind of an arbitrarily derived number, this student-faculty ratio, some efficiency number, which universities are so different, it doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. And so recognizing that introduces some ambiguity in the exercise, go back and see if you can do better, is kind of not clear marching orders. Asked folks to do this consultatively with their employees and their councils of trustees and other stakeholders to do as best they can. And that's where we are. So let me just talk about how we're going to get through this, or how I think we're going to get through this. So one of them is we're going to have to get through this. We're going to have to figure out how to get through this together. And again, I think that's less of a problem here at Westchester because of the relationships that have been built over time than it's going to be at some places. But that work on culture and engagement and even the sort of shared governance structures is not done, and we're going to have to figure out how to work closely together in advance of having those structures in place. I hope we'll use it as an opportunity to refine and improve those structures and our culture. We're going to get through it because our presidents are committed to providing the leadership that's going to be necessary. I have every confidence in them. I certainly have every confidence in your president. I need to turn to your president to make these decisions. You know, there is a consultation process. There is a great information gathering process. But at the end of the day, I have to ask Chris, what's best for Westchester? What's best for the system? And I have to trust, and I do, in his judgment. And I will do that 14 times across the universities. My hope is that we do this realistically, right? Students are going to start registering in a couple weeks for fall term. Is that right? So there's this, don't get me wrong, there's a high degree of urgency. But I want us to manage our expectations. This is not a one and done, right? This is a multi-year journey. We will get better at it. We need to pace ourselves. We need to be realistic. We need to size the task to the things that we can accomplish. So I hope we'll actually be able to manage our expectations about what we can and must accomplish now. This is a longer, that's the thing, I guess, too. And the other thing, and then I'm going to stop, is that we are going to get through this as a system. I have absolutely no doubt. It is going to stretch us. I have no doubt about that either. But we will get through it. The much more important part of system redesign has two component parts: financial stabilization and investment in the future. The good news is financial stabilization, there's a playbook. We'll follow it. We will get through it. And we'll get on to the much more exciting stuff, which is the investment in the future. And frankly, I think by stabilizing ourselves financially, we will position ourselves to invest even better in our future. So let me leave it there. Take any questions that you have, and thank you. And there are mics here and here.
If you have a question, if you would come up to one of the two mics on either side here, we would appreciate that. And please give your name and the department that you're from. That would be helpful as well. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Ed Bartholdi, and I'm in the electric shop. And I was just wondering, will this affect the trades, and how will it affect the trades?
Just hum a few bars. When you say the trades, you mean the trades as practiced?
Mechanical, HVAC, electrical, right. Plumbing, anything like that. Or our housekeeping, or things like that.
So I can really only so the general answer is these are decisions that the universities are going to be making internally, and the answer is going to be different depending on where you are. Our universities are very, very differently situated. Just to give you some examples, and I'll turn to Chris. We have universities that will run out of cash this year. Okay. Their situation is profoundly different than Westchester, and we have everything in the middle.
Okay, well, I think right off the bat, there are things that have to be done physically on this campus by people, and they can't be moved to some other location. And certainly the trades generally will fall into that. Universities are made up predominantly of people. If you look at our budgets, we're mainly people. And we have a large community of people who are here who care about this place, and we're very mindful of that. We don't want to make changes that will damage our ability to perform the duties that we need to perform to do our work. We consider ourselves a community of educators. We include everybody in that definition, and that is important and remains important. So I would say, generally speaking, moving in that direction for us is not something that we're even considering at this point. We have to be realistic and step back and say, if things get really bad, what are we going to have to do to protect the mission of the institution? We're not at that point. But I think Dan didn't say this, but one of the realities of the system is really one big organization. And Westchester, we're thriving right now. Our enrollments are growing, our budgets are very stable, but we are part of this organization, and it's very important for us that all of the members of the state system be fiscally healthy and successful, or that's going to negatively impact on us. As Dan pointed out, just going through the stabilization process could cost us millions of dollars to help support them. And it is in our best interest to do that. We need them to be stable. But for any foreseeable, reasonable future, the answer to your question is no. We have no plans to alter any of these activities that are functioning very effectively on the campus right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Jason Wozniak, Education Foundations and Policy Studies. So first off, I want to thank you for being here. I also want to share my gratitude with you, stressing the collective struggle of this all. In addition, that you stress that we're an education institution. We're not a business. It's not about making profit. And I just had a question about the time period that we're living in. Obviously, politically, it's really interesting for a lot of reasons. And we have a Democratic potential nominee in Bernie Sanders that has put forth a College for All plan, which I'm sure you know about. And, you know, kind of quoting from his proposal, to run the public education system in our country would take around $70 billion. That's an estimate. According to his plan, the federal government would pay 67% of that. The states would have to come up with 33%. It would also eliminate all the terrible student debt that our students, especially here in Pennsylvania, are struggling with. So my question is whether or not there's been some feasibility studies or some sort of anything to like play with the numbers and see how would that change the game.
Yeah.
And if there hasn't been, whether or not you all would be open to exploring that.
So, no, this is a great question. And just to build on your point, the biggest problem, we exist in a much larger context, obviously, and that context is, frankly, Pennsylvania has a massive affordability crisis in higher education. We are the second least affordable state for higher education, not just public. Our state is third nationally in terms of investment in public higher education per student. Our students have the second or third highest debt level, graduating students across the nation. The impacts, you can see I'm coming out of one appropriations hearing and preparing for the next. The impacts on this state are just awful. And the numbers that I use, our workforce requires 60% of our adults to have some form of high school education. Currently, we're at 47.5%. To make up the difference, we need it now, but to make up the difference between now and 2025 would require 8 to 9% compound annual growth rate in terms of credentialing productivity. So, basically from a political perspective, this is about the economy. And the failure to address this issue is putting the state's economy at risk significantly. And student affordability is what's causing the gap. I mean, right now, our students are dropping away from, this is Pennsylvania generally, higher education, and particularly students in low and middle income groups who we need to make those numbers up. So even if you look at this purely from a workforce development, it's a disaster. So Sanders' proposal and other sort of free college proposals or equivalents are addressing the affordability issue head on in a really important way. The likelihood of that happening in a period where it really makes a difference to us, I would leave it to you. I can't speculate.
I don't know either. That's why I think it'd be interesting to study the issue.
Yeah. But, we've obviously, with the governor's proposal for a scholarship program, The scholarship, these are great programs. They help our students. They don't help us. They only help us if we enroll more students. So we were talking about this with the the PA SMART program, which is a great program. I mean, great idea, super interesting. Really good for our students. Our problems are enrollment numbers. Now, it's more important that we solve the from a social public policy perspective, it's much more important that we solve the student debt and affordability issue, right? So we could have free college and still not attract students. And so our financial circumstances. So that's thing one. Our need is also is now. I mean, so projected on version 1 of the sustainability plans, it was probably looking at $5 to $8 million, $4 to $8 million in loans required this year, and 25 next year, 25 after that. So our needs are more immediate probably than implementation of a scholarship program. But it is essential that the nation addresses this challenge. It's essential that the state addresses this challenge. And there's the self-interest to business and political. And I come at this from an equity perspective. The broader world comes at it from an economic development perspective, but it's the same problem. So keep pushing, because affordability is the key.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chancellor, we have a couple questions that are coming in from
Great.
our folks that are watching online. This is from Becky in the nutrition department. She says, you mentioned in another presentation that 45,000 Pennsylvania students are turning to online programs, and that we should consider more online state system programs. What is the plan to ensure quality?
Yeah, so for me, I've said this before, it is all about choice, and these are choices that universities will make. But 43,000 students every year are going to one of the big box retail online schools. 5 of them: Liberty, Arizona, Western Governors, Phoenix, and Southern New Hampshire. And there's a couple of others, but those are the big ones. And they're not going there because they can't find they're going there because they want an online program. So we can choose to just leave that on the table, and that's okay. That's a choice. The Pennsylvania General Assembly has to make a choice too. Are they going to invest in public higher education? That's a choice. These choices have consequences. And these choices ultimately will need to be made by universities. So that's thing one. Thing two, obviously, is if universities, one or several, decide to more aggressively go after the undergraduate market. Oh, and by the way, those 43,000 students who are going out of state, they're going to providers, every one of whose price is equal to or higher than ours, with one exception. Our price on ground, and actually online, is as good or better than theirs. So we're just deciding to not engage. In terms of quality, how do we ensure quality of any of our instructional activities? I mean, my experience of being a member of faculty was we're all about quality and peer review. I mean, quality control is not our problem. We have those mechanisms in place. I think there's even a general recognition, because we do enough online, there's plenty of expertise in the system, to know that online instruction is fundamentally different than on ground. It's not just teaching on ground, but doing it over the airwaves. It's a fundamentally different act. So I think we have the mechanisms in place, and we'd have to use them in the normal way. But I'm less concerned about that than I'm concerned about, and this is not necessarily a Westchester thing, I'm concerned about the fact that there's just seems to me to be low-hanging fruit. 43,000 students. Are we okay that they're going out of state? Our transfer numbers, not at Westchester, but generally across the system, transfer students, community colleges are transferring 13% fewer students. And we're losing, our transfer numbers are down 27%, or something like that. What's happening? Why is that the case? We have universities operating in regions where the population is flat and are still losing 20+% enrollments. We have to, so these choices are becoming critical. They're no longer ideological. existential. And I think it's really important, especially with the online. Are we okay that our students should be going out of state to providers who don't have any connectivity with their communities or their employers? I'm not fully comfortable with it.
Frank Vish, biology. I've been here almost 40 years, so I have a different perspective than other people. And since I've been here, as far as I can remember, there were various universities within the system that were declared fiscally not responsible, which means they could go into the red and no one could say really boo about it.
Yeah.
And so I have one statement there, or one question, but I want to move on also, is there any oversight to keeping those institutions to balance their budgets and such, regardless?
Yeah.
The other thing, too, is that, yes, the demographics have changed and whatnot. Westchester's done very well, and there are a number of reasons, but I think one reason is the reputation, okay? People will go to places in the middle of nowhere, out with the cows, okay, if the reputation of the school is good, and they value that. I think we've improved tremendously in the 40 years that I've been here. This has changed remarkably. We now get grants, we publish papers, we get the reputation of the school out. So what is being done to increase the reputation of these places? Because, the only time I ever hear of Slippery Rock is when I'm in the University of Michigan Stadium and they put up the football score for Slippery Rock, I think only because it's a cute name. So what's being done to actually build up reputation? Because I think that's why we have people come here. When I came, this was considered to be a safe school. It wasn't the primary school that you wanted to go to. Now I talk to students, this is the place they want to come. They want to get educated here. They want to have opportunity here.
Yeah, and that 40 years, I mean, I can't even imagine, because what a tremendous journey. I mean, for you personally, but for the university as a whole, just the level of change is amazing. So a couple things. First of all, Slippery Rock is, I think, slightly more selective than Westchester, so it proves your point that people will go for reputation to, less urban areas. The second point, though, which is which is a very important one, is the sustainability policy, which results in these plans and this planning, is board-approved policy in October, which puts in place real accountability. Because you're right, it did not exist. And, the ultimate accountability is in the policy, which gives the board basically the authority through the chancellor for universities who fail to meet the goals of their sustainability plans, that there's a board has the authority to suspend certain operations.
What about reputation? How can
Sorry, reputation. So, I think, and this is where the president's coming together is going to be absolutely critical, their review of the plan, because I think the greater accountability is, and you might want to talk about this, is the presidents working with each other. So when we went through these plans, there was some very courageous, it was one of the, probably one of the best days of my professional life. Really tough, courageous conversations about, well, are those enrollment numbers really realistic, and what are you doing to address those numbers? And we need to continue to have those conversations. And the one thing that comes out of them is sort of a peer accountability, which is quite powerful. But another thing which is beginning to emerge is a kind of peer mentoring. Have you thought about this? We've tried this, and it seems to have worked really well. So I think there's, and that opportunity obviously goes deeper than the president's. So we have in place, again, this sort of idea of a sharing system is about a high degree of accountability, and it is peer accountability as much as board accountability, but a high degree of expertise sharing. And that's going to be important. We were talking about this morning, and I don't know if you want to say anything about any of this. We were talking about this morning, the capability to do many of the things we're thinking about exists differentially in pockets across our universities. A lot of it is resident here in Westchester. How do we actually use that to enable others to do things they may not have they may have the will but not the skill, if that makes sense to do. I don't know if you wanted to jump in on any of that.
Well, from our perspective, in terms of the accountability piece, what I'm making clear from Westchester's perspective is that we understand that we have to help, but You might remember several years ago, our base appropriation was reduced by $3.5 million and sent to other schools, and there was no expectation that they were going to do anything better than they had before. They just got that money, which reduced the pressure on them. And the kind of pressure that we're trying to put on the schools now is, we will help you, but we need to see results. We you know, the math around this, we've taken a look at where we were in 2012 as a system, the high point of enrollments, and what our student-faculty ratios were, and then took a look at what our faculty need would be now if we were just to achieve those ratios that existed back then. And we have over 700 faculty more than we need in order to achieve those ratios, which we're not, you know, we were not talking about massive large lecture sections. We were just talking about operating classes that were reasonably full. So we're looking at that and saying, as the enrollments have declined over these years, where have the campuses been in realigning the resources? It hasn't been happening, and that needs to happen. That's the big conversation that we're having around this. That led to the number of the things that were in the Chancellor's message that went out, and some of the things that we're trying to work on collectively. Frank, in terms of reputation, you know, obviously I'm aware of what you're talking about. It took a long time for us to build that reputation, and that's certainly not something that's going to be a quick fix for places. I think the schools in the system do have great reputations within their regions. There are a number of the other schools that have accredited business programs, the same as ours, that are well respected. But that's really a long-run process to achieve an improved reputation. So that's a tricky one to try to implement to solve the kinds of urgent problems we're having right now.
Thank you.
Have another question from our online folks. This is from Yeda Arscott in the Facilities Department. What are the plans for Cheney?
So in Cheney's, so Cheney received a kind of a conditional approval of its accreditation in November, but largely based on a promise by the governor to eliminate Cheney's debt to the system, which was about $45 billion. The governor has, to eliminate Cheney's debt to the system, has allocated the system capital dollars, DGS dollars, which we can, over a 3-year period, up to $15 million a year, which we can use in ways that will effectively eliminate the debt to the system, which is really about, that was really about a debt to the universities, right? Because the universities are on the hook for that $45 million. So, so the board acted to approve that offer out of its fiduciary responsibility for the other universities, which was the right thing to do, in my view. Cheney's plan is audacious. I actually understand it. It's simple and it's kind of beautiful. It's going to be super hard. But they're basically saying, look, we've got a lot of valuable land and buildings, and let's leverage that. And if we can generate a certain amount of income, between a quarter and a third of our annual income, we can afford to be a relatively low enrolled school. It's a diversify your revenue stream. Most universities, you know, are almost entirely enrollment driven economically. So they're basically saying, look, we're small, that's not going to work for us. So how do we diversify? And so their idea is to use land and buildings. They've made some interesting partnerships in the use of those land and buildings, and they're looking for partners who will not just use the land and buildings, but in using the land and buildings, create internship opportunities for their students. Pretty interesting. We've also learned a lot about how to do those kind of public-private partnerships from Cheney, and those lessons are already being learned and used across the system at other schools where that also makes sense. Are they out of the woods? No, not by a long shot. Is the leadership aware of that? Yeah, very, very much so. But just so you know, I think about. I tend to think about a triage, and when I think about a school which is struggling, I want to understand its path. I don't necessarily need to disagree with it or even believe that it's going to work, but I want to understand what it is, and I want to understand, at least have some point of view about what do I need to believe to make me think it's going to work. So I just personally, it's not that I don't love Cheney, I'm now turning my attention elsewhere because I understand Cheney in ways that I simply don't other places. And so we really need to help them achieve that level of clarity around their business plan.
My name is Alina McLeod. I'm one of the HEPSA students here at Westchester University. You brought up in your blog that you posted on February 13th about online institutions.
Yeah.
And then you were talking here today about preventing our smaller institutions like Lock Haven, Mansfield, and our other Western Apache schools as well from being in the red. In the near future, we're going to see a slight decline in the number of students coming into colleges. So how do you plan to continue to keep those smaller institutions alive, being that they bring so much job opportunity to those small towns, and without those universities, you're going to cause not only job loss for the people in those towns, but for the students who also work in those local stores, local restaurants that serve the population of Lock Haven and so on.
No, some of these, a bunch of our schools are the #1 employer in their region, and a whole bunch more are in the top 10. So the impacts of job loss are significant. So what a chancellor can't tell a university what to do. This sustainability planning process is a collective process. And so it's a process in which we're asking our universities to say, what are you going to do to balance your budgets? And this is the point that the President was addressing. And what I can do, what we can do from a system leadership perspective is create a policy environment where they're actually held accountable, to the gentleman's point a moment ago, that they're actually held accountable for meeting the goals that they set for themselves. We can also provide support. We're talking about shared services. We're talking about putting in place the means to enable students at any one university to access academic courses and programs elsewhere. That's really important for low-enrolled schools because it allows them to continue to offer the breadth of general education that's important to keep enrollments up. So there's a lot that we can do together working as a system to create an environment which is more enabling for those universities to help them. But at the end of the day, to the point the President made, they have to make these tough decisions. They have to make these difficult choices, the choices that that all of us have to make, and they have to, and then to be held accountable for delivering against them. So we're helping each other, but it's really the responsibility of the President and the university to determine their own sort of future within those parameters. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, I'm Sean File from Physics, and I had just a question about if there's any sense at the state level about the broader system of education which is state-supported, with Penn State and the satellite campuses, and whether or not there's any sense of establishing sort of lanes for these institutions, right? Because we're not only competing for enrollment with other Apache schools, but also with, say, Penn State satellite campus here or there, right?
Yeah.
And
So there is a higher education funding commission which met here, right, a couple months ago, of the Senate, but I think it's both houses of the General Assembly. They're looking at this problem. We're oversupplied in Pennsylvania, and we're deeply siloized. So I had the pleasure of testifying before the commission, I guess, a few weeks ago, and I was very clear. You've got to figure out a way to size properly. I was encouraging them, though, to think not in terms of silos. This group does this student body and this labor market. This group does, but to think instead in terms of the lifelong learning pathways that people need. Right? If I'm a student today, I'm going to be learning in and out of college across my life, in and out of higher education across my lifetime as I reskill and upskill and evolve, et cetera. And so, how do we get existing institutions to align along those pathways? A very different mindset. My impression is that members of the General Assembly, and I thought it was a great commission. They're super smart people. They really get education in ways that you don't always expect coming out of the elected representatives. That's not a criticism of elected representatives. Really smart on the topic. You can see them beginning to engage in this new educational reality, and then, oh my goodness, what does it mean to take a legacy that was built for a completely different time, and how do we use our policy and funding levers to begin to shift it to this new model? But I think there's a widespread recognition that there's oversupply in the space that we're operating in. Yeah.
Chancellor, I want to thank you for coming out to see us in person. I'm Jessie Pearsall. I've been an adjunct instructor in the Department of Communication and Media for the last 11 years. I did the math on this on my drive today, and in that time, I've taught more than 100 classes. More than 3,000 students have walked through my doors, hopefully sending them out into the world with critical thinking skills and maybe making them a little bit more comfortable with the idea of standing up in an auditorium full of people and speaking their mind. In that time, I've certainly developed deep roots in this community, contributed to the success of this community, as hopefully all of our students will, as alums and more as they go forth into the world. My question is, what's going to happen to me as an adjunct? What's going to happen to my adjunct instructors who also have been perhaps not as visible in some ways, but just as essential to growing the success of this community here?
Can I take the point at a general level and then turn to you, Chris, to talk specifically? So at a general level, if you look at across our systems, Chris mentioned before student-faculty ratios, they vary from 11 or 12 to 20. If you look at faculty workload, however you measure it, you see the same range of variability. You just do. And you don't want to go too deep into the numbers because there's all sorts of reasons that faculty are distributed in different ways, their workload. But there's that enormous range of variability, and that suggests that there's a lot of inequity. And so the question we're asking is, how can we utilize the talent that we have in the way that's best for our students and best financially for our universities over a long period of time? And can we change the math if we think together working as a bunch of universities on this problem rather than each tub on its own bottom? That was the directive. That was the intent of the directive. So that's thing one. The impacts are going to be different, not just, I think, across universities. I'm going to turn to Chris. I think the impacts are going to be different within universities because there's no consistent, and there shouldn't be, use of adjuncts. This is really a directive to be super thoughtful. We have permanent commitments to several thousand faculty. If we're underutilizing them, whatever that means, we're not doing ourselves or our students any good. Does it look differently if we work together on that? I don't know if you want to talk about.
Sure, let me address it. I threw out a number a minute ago, 760 or so too many faculty. And so something has to give. We can't sustain that. We have the retirement buyout that we're working on. Has a few more days left in it. We're optimistic that this is going to work. Obviously, to the extent that we can reduce the over supply of or the excess faculty complement through attrition, that's great. That's the simplest way. There are some realities around the contract relative to temporary faculty, where they fit in relative to permanent faculty. But first of all, let's be clear. Westchester is not in a position of having too many faculty. That just does not apply to us. To the extent that we are looking at the other institutions to see how we could assist them in trying to make the kinds of transitions that they need to make, that's really what we're talking about. Now, from our perspective, how that's going to play out is going to depend upon how the departments respond, because ultimately there are requirements in the contract that will require faculty to act, and if the faculty choose not to take on faculty from other institutions, then that's settled, that's finished. Now, What Laurie Bernowski has pointed out is that every year we have over 200, where's Jeff? 200 FTE temporary faculty. And of that, we hire about 60 FTE of brand new people. All right? We can contribute to the solution to this problem without having to impact any of our current longtime adjunct faculty. So I would suspect that somebody in your position who has been here as long and has been as successful really should not be in a position to worry about how that's going to impact you. Now, might we end up with a smaller total temporary faculty complement? Yes, to the extent that we are successful in helping our sister institutions, we should. But that could be accomplished by simply not hiring people who don't even work here yet. That's how we're thinking about it. Okay?
Hi, good morning, Chancellor. Thank you again for coming. My name is Taylor Gibson Campbell. I'm a junior, and I'm also president of the Student Government Association here. So it's very crucial to me, and I'm sure to a lot of students, that there's a student voice and there's students at the table in this discussion. So I'm really curious to know how important is student voice to you in the PASHE redesign. And I'm also curious, with other PASHE schools, I know Dr. Ferrantino does a very good job of making himself available to students, whether it's town halls or breakfasts or other activities where he interacts with students. So I'm very curious to know what other presidents within the PASHE system are doing to give students from other schools that aren't doing as well as Westchester a voice in this process.
Great question. Students are very important to me personally because you are why we do what we do. I mean, you provide collectively a reason to get up in the morning. It's just there's no other reason to get up in the morning, to be perfectly honest. I have a good coffee maker, but and then structurally speaking, the Board of Governors has 3 voting members, student members, which is a lot for a board typically. And they're super active. They're always good. We have a good group right now. And then again, structurally, all of our system redesign teams have students. I mean, not all of them. I don't think the budget team has a student, no. But I think, the ones that are dealing with student success issues or academic issues all have students' voices. I make myself available to students during these visits in the spring, although it was a great meeting yesterday. I was at SHIP, and the Student Government Association it just added onto my schedule, and I met with like a whole bunch of folks. Great. And I do occasional focus groups or participate in them around various aspects of of system redesign, especially those student-facing aspects. Always really, really helpful. I think as we go further into the, design, especially of thinking about some of our student-facing, both academic but also student services, advising, supplemental instruction, health and wellness services. We started with students, and we need to continue and will engage them in some of the design of the innovations that we're looking at. So it's super important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
From our Criminal Justice Department, Professor Sami Abdel Salani, I think that's how it's pronounced, asks, how does the system plan to handle the increasing costs, such as staff and or salaries associated with administrative units on our campuses?
Yeah. So, again, it's so important, at least for me, to get to benchmark numbers. I always benchmark numbers. So I'll give our benchmarks. If you go to our pashe.edu, the website, on the front page, you'll see our appropriations request. In our appropriations request, we use it as accountability dashboard, so there's a lot of data in it. Our student-faculty ratios are actually lower than our comparator groups nationally, so we're less efficient. I think our staff student ratios are actually higher, which means, lower. So we're more efficient on the staff side when we compare ourselves to the comparator groups than we are on the university side. I'm not making any excuses, that's what the numbers show. And if you look at salaries, that's also the case. That if you look at, I love this line, and Chris is going to forgive me. Our presidents are average. They're not, but their salaries are within their peer groups. I mean, they were actually set by policy in that way. Our faculty are actually a little bit above average, but close enough to average to be average, and I don't mean that in terms of quality of faculty. So, our salary levels are not really the issue. I don't think our staffing levels are, wickedly out of line. But all of these data are available. We're building an intraweb. All the data that I look at are going to be available to you. Compensation, head count, change in head count by bargaining unit, by functional group, change in compensation by bargaining unit and functional group. All this stuff is now and will continue to be available. So that if you have these questions, you should have a place to go and look at the stuff that I'm looking at.
Dan, can I add a comment?
Please.
We hear a lot about hiring managers and that we seem to be hiring an excessive number of managers. And I want to just point something out to the community, because you may or may not be aware of this. When we look at the entire group of people who are classified as managers, there is a group who are what we would call the senior policy executives, or the actual suits on the campus, so to speak. And that's a relatively small percentage of the total number of people who are classified as managers. In our system, there are a lot of people who are actually performing work in support of the university mission who are called managers, but they're not really managing people per se. They're not here to manage people. They're here, they're running the computer systems, and they're running the student-facing offices and doing a lot of work in support of the mission of the university. So it's important to look at the percentage of the managers who would be in the leadership positions and the percentage who are actually in the trenches doing work. And I'd encourage you to take a look at that. It's something you could see. But if you think our range of managers goes from about 140 to 250-ish or something like that, and the people who are in the positions that are 200 and above are the deans and directors and AVPs and cabinet members and so forth. And then the 190 and below are in the trenches doing work, even though they're called managers. So that's an important distinction to be aware of.
And you'll see, it's not there yet, but we've taken the non-represented category in the data that are at this intraweb, and we've broken it out by those numbers. There is growth, so we'll see specifically where that growth is, and we'll see what the compensation trends are. So you'll see them too.
Hi. So my name's Margaret Irvin. I'm a faculty member in the English department. Nice to see you. My question has to do with our new Article 34. We've had an inter-university transfer article in the past, but we've hopefully recreated that in the new collective bargaining agreement to be something that could actually work, which would be less stressful and traumatic than retrenchment. From the side of faculty members deciding that they would like to transfer, that probably won't kick in until a job, or it won't kick in until a job goes to the clearinghouse and faculty see it and can apply. But there's also a management-initiated transfer, and my question is very blunt. It's just, has that process started, and has Westchester been approached with inter-university transfers initiated by managers at other universities?
So thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Margaret, for working on Article 34. Margaret was part of the negotiating team, so we spent hours together in carbohydrate-filled rooms. So we're just putting in place, as you know, I think, the training around the new contract, and putting in place the systems that will enable us to do the kind of work we talked about, making sure that faculty and staff had visibility into potential openings. So that stuff is going forward. We're also looking at putting in place, specifically for managers, but it's a conversation I want to have with Ken about whether we should do this jointly, about whether specific areas of the contract which are critical to this journey, and Article 34 would be one of them, whether we should host specific sessions on that, because it's not clear to me how not clear to me that everyone has the same level of understanding as you and I might have had the opportunity to develop. I'd love your thoughts on that. But I mean, my impression of these training programs, they can be done pretty quickly through kind of webinars that are recorded, and once they're done a few times, then they're available to the general. So yeah, we have, and not just Article 34, we have a bunch of stuff in the contract which will help us here. Do you think we should do specific training? I think we maybe should.
I probably have to do that, but
Yeah.
my question, I don't know if you can answer it, but I'm
Yeah.
just going to say, have presidents from other universities been coming to Westchester already? Because the contract's in place.
Yeah.
That could happen.
Yeah.
Has it happened?
Process is just beginning to start. I mean, go ahead, Chris.
Coming to do what? I didn't quite follow you.
So the Article 34, the newly written one, would allow, for example, a president from, well, we're just talking about Slippery Rock, although they're doing great, so this
Yeah.
wouldn't happen, but they could say, we have this faculty member.
Oh, okay,
do
I
you
understand the
have-"
faculty piece.
No,
I'm
the
trying to
management
understand
initiated. So so the president can come to you and say, do you have a position for my, organic chemist? Can we talk, right?
To
And
help
we
in
can
the
start
faculty
at that.
sharing.
So it could start at that level, and I'm just
Yeah.
wondering,
I
no, I guess the
thought,
answer is no.
I thought you were going a step further in talking about moving management people. If you're talking about faculty,
Oh, yes, faculty. So I'm talking about the
well,
collective bargaining agreement.
we certainly have had these conversations.
Uh-huh.
Several of the schools, sitting with the president of Slippery Rock, keeps coming up, but Slippery Rock is also doing very well right now. And so we're hiring faculty. We have open positions that we're searching for. We are interested in setting up a process by which we would look to the other institutions to see if there are faculty there who would be interested in filling our open tenure track positions rather than us putting it out for a search. So to the extent that we can get that flow of information out there, and of course this would have to be a voluntary decision on the
Right.
part of a faculty member, but if we're talking about newly hired people who haven't established roots in a given place and are looking at the prospect of challenging circumstances, it would make sense for us to do that. So we are interested in doing it. I can't say that we've gotten to the point where things have started to happen, but we're impatient to get them started because we have searches that are ongoing and open positions. And why wouldn't we want to take a look at the great pool of faculty we have at other institutions who might be interested in moving? So we're serious about doing that, Margaret. We just have to figure out how to get people serious about looking at it and considering it.
And out of my office,
You want this one? Okay.
Melissa wants to know how to do that. My partner. From out of my office, I see two things happening. One in the HR side, how do you give visibility? The other is the CAOs are actually doing kind of demand supply lists to try to identify need. And again, I'm going to go back to the comment I made about managing expectations. We want to really focus on the needs that will really make a difference for the universities that have the most need. So, rather than just exchange wildly, randomly, I really want to focus. I'd love to get this right a few times to figure out how to do it in a scalable way and focusing on the real problem areas. That's why I do want to manage people's expectations about how much we're going to get done for next term.
I know I'm hogging the mic a little
Yeah,
bit, but
not at all.
maybe I just want to say back what I'm understanding is
Yeah.
that you're not interested in a ad hoc process. You're interested in the presidents as a whole talking and being intentional about what all the resources are. So rather than Joe calling up Jack, it's all the presidents together talking. That's the kind of vision that I was hearing, or I thought that's what I was hearing.
That would make the most sense, to be as systematic as possible. I think if we had a formal clearinghouse, Jeff, I don't know if you've been involved in these conversations around, I know Laurie has, the more systematic we can be, the more efficient we can be. It certainly could start with one-on-one conversations. There obviously are logical things, again, Slippery Rock, Edinburgh, Clarion, IUP are all kind of close together. Kutztown, Westchester, Millersville, there are clusters of schools where it might be easier to facilitate these things. And frankly, they could be informal or formal, but the better the information we have, and this supply and demand modeling is a very good first step, because if we know that we're hiring 2 English professors, and there are schools who well, either know they don't have work for their English faculty, and you know, we've talked about doing this on a partial load basis or on an actual movement from one campus to the other basis. Either way, we're taking some of the pressure off, and we're interested in trying to do that. Because again, anything like that takes pressure off of the other schools from a financial standpoint is good for us in the long run.
And your point's a good one, though, because a lot of these relationships are going to be peer-to-peer, chair-to-chair, faculty member to faculty member. So as I'm thinking, as you're speaking, you know, we've got to engineer a process which allows those peer-to-peer networks. Chair's going to feel some certain amount of, you know, pressure, obligation, or whatever, interest in hiring potentially from another department. How do we create a vehicle, a venue for that need to get known and acted upon, you know, so we can actually take advantage of the relationships that they might have? No, that's really super helpful. And I just want to make a shared governance point, and this is where, again, timing's kind of bad. We don't yet have that body at the system level. So this is a system level discussion. So when we started down this path of sort of shared governance at the system level, this is at least what I was thinking. That we have these mechanisms on campus to do interdepartmental on university, right? Statewide meet and discuss, other venues. We don't have them at the system level, and this is a university-to-university activity. It's actually a university-to-university activity in the context of all 14. So we have CAOs who can meet together and presidents who can meet together, and we have statewide meet and discuss, but that has certain contractual, you know, it's dealing with contractual, it has a defined set of you know, focal points. So we really need to there's a missing middle there. It's just, it's not there yet. And I don't have a point of view about where it comes from.
I think there might be. I mean, there is for English departments, I know. So
There what?
There's an English, I know the acronym is EOPSU, but anyway, the
Could bring the
English
yeah.
Association of the Pennsylvania State Colleges and Universities. So I bet there's other ones, but I
There
don't
are.
know. Yeah.
No, it's a great, no, it's super helpful. Thank you. That's great.
Hi, my name's Aubrey. I'm a work study student from the social work department.
Yeah.
And you guys both mentioned about how Westchester has high enrollment rates and like we're a very credible school. So I was just wondering, how are we leading by example with the terms of budget?
Oh, God. And just so you know, I love all of our universities. I think they're all credible. And super, they're fantastic in their own way. I should have said that. You know, some of them are struggling, but they have so much civic presence. How are you leading by example? Quality shows up in all sorts of, you know, usual ways. Ruthlessly efficient. I say that in the nicest possible way. Just are. But I think there's some less. This, to me anyway, is observational. There's some subjective things that aren't quantifiable. And I've had a bunch of meetings last time I was here with faculty and with deans independently to talk about shared governance, faculty shared governance. There's a collegiality that exists here, both within and across, you know, different groups, which is great. You just feel it. It's kind of in the water. I mean, you must feel it every day. I feel it when I walk on campus. Those things aren't quantifiable, but they're really real. You know, I think there are really interesting ways of, you know, doing funding and decision-making and all sorts of other stuff. So there's a lot of strength here. And you should be very proud of what you've accomplished and what you have. It's exemplary. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could just make a related point. The 14 universities are filled with quality.
Yeah.
The fact that we have fiscal problems are related to a number of specific circumstances about the funding commitments that we get, but nobody should assume, and I've said this in front of the board, and I say it to legislators whenever I see them, don't confuse fiscal challenges with low-quality educational offerings, because all the schools are offering high-quality programs. And I'm not just saying that to be nice. It's absolutely true. But there's a real danger of assuming that schools are in financial trouble because there's some quality issue associated with it, and that is just not the case.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Good morning, Mr. Chancellor.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming to Westchester University. I am a professor of kinesiology, and my name's Eve Atkinson. I head up the program graduate program for sports management, but I've had about a 50-year history here at the university. So my undergraduate degree and a BS, and also then my master's from Westchester. So I'm very committed to this institution. I'm also an unusual transfer from Cheney University, where I was a full professor also. So that gives you a little bit of my background. When I was an undergraduate here, the state support was about 78%. So my parents paid, I believe it was about $1,500 a year for room and board and tuition and fees. So it was very, very affordable. And as we know, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our subsidy now at Westchester is about 18%, is that correct?
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Pardon me?
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, okay, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, I mean, a lot of this issue of the finances has really come from the state and different governors, et cetera. You know, that's a major concern and change, and also, too, we're just not keeping up nationwide with our competitors in other states. So, in trying to, because I've been an administrator in my life a long time, too, along with being a professor, so you try to come up with solutions. And, of course, there's been talk about cutting adjunct faculty, and I'd like to say that our adjunct faculty here at Westchester are very good, and we need them. Also, too, what about the hard decisions of closing other campuses, or at least having other campuses team up? An example, although my Cheney colleagues may not like this, but I do keep in touch with them and still serve on some committees over there. But where we would team up more Westchester and Cheney together, students would end up to either choose a Cheney degree or a Westchester degree at their choice, you know, with graduation and commencements and the traditions associated with those schools. So that's one issue to look at. And also, too, there seems to have been a growth in management, and I know a lot of that has to do with accreditations and state regulations, et cetera. But I think we also need to look at that on the management side. I would like to commend at least our management here at Westchester. I think is very, very efficient and service the students extremely well and the faculty very well. But of course, that's not throughout the state. So I throw out some of those issues to hear your comments, and then at the end, if you could comment on, Chris mentioned the sick leave buyout. I believe the deadline is March 1st. Last I heard, I think we had 165 or maybe, no, I think it was 180 last week or whatever. Is there any update on that? And I appreciate your responses.
The update as of yesterday was 195.
So we're 5 short.
5 short.
I put mine in. I'm promoting the product.
I'm disappointed to hear that because if you had added it, then it would be 196. But thank you.
You can count me twice if you like. You know what? You can count me 5 times.
Thank you for your service and congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
So a couple things. Really what you see in them, we're looking at affiliation. I mean, we are. I mean, if you think about the whole sharing system redesign, it puts in place the environment that enables us to share deeply. Now, whether you talk about that in terms of affiliation, consolidation, integration, some of those words are loaded, but the rationale from right out of the gate from the system redesign was that each tub on its own bottom approach is no longer sustainable. It just isn't. A number of our universities have reached enrollment levels that don't permit that, or that make that super challenging. And because we're a single organization, structurally, we can't afford to let that happen. What you saw in the memorandum was just another step. Okay, now that we'd have liked to have had another year or so to build the infrastructure, but, now that we're, against the circumstances, let's see what we can do in terms of sharing faculty, in terms of sharing staff, in terms of consolidating lines. And low-enroll programs in a cross-university way. So you're seeing a move in that direction. I was very open about that, actually, in the Senate budget testimony last week when asked specifically on that question. I said, of course we're moving in that direction. We have to. Actually, we have a legislative agenda, which also gives us the authorities that we don't have to the board to move more in that direction, to enable us to do that. We can only go so far because our enabling statute only does not permit the board to make any changes to the corporate structure. So we're moving in that direction, and we need to, and that's a good thing. I think we can do it without sacrificing individual identity of the universities. I think we could do that strengthening identity of universities, so that's also a good thing. That was the consolidation point. We talked about the retirement. There was another one.
Well, the management maybe, not so much
management. So we talked
not so
about
much at Westchester,
yeah.
but at other
So we talked about
schools.
So when you look at them, to Chris's point, so if you use the term manager specifically, people who manage other people, there's far fewer of those. People tend to conflate, in my experience, management and non-represented. Mm-hmm. So I think we're talking about the non-represented, and to Chris's point, you have to look at the non-represented sort of holistically. There has been growth. There has been considerable growth here at Westchester. Of course, there's also been enrollment growth. But we have to unpack that, and in the way that the president suggested, go by, what's it called, title code, 140, 150, 160, the levels. We have
classifications.
But we have to look at those numbers by classification. I have not done that yet. Those data will be available to you. And you're absolutely right. We have to look at everything.
Right.
It's like this is a no stone unturned opportunity. And we have to satisfy ourselves that we have done everything we can responsibly and in a way that minimizes impact on our students in particular. Yeah.
Let me make a couple of follow-up points. Even though we are in a very stable circumstance right now here at Westchester, and actually perhaps because of the way we work that has contributed to our stable circumstance, we're always looking and challenging the complement of managers. Since I've been the president, there are 3 positions that were in cabinet that are no longer there. 3 vice presidential positions have been eliminated.
That, yep.
And the members of cabinet can verify. We were talking just the other day about if we're looking at doing new things, we need to be thinking about what we need to stop doing in order to do that. We need to stop this just proliferation of new positions, because even though we're in a very healthy position, we're not in a position where we see the millions of dollars of additional base coming in. Our enrollments are stable but not growing dramatically, so we don't have a lot of extra money. So we're constantly looking very carefully at anything that we want to do. And all the VPs know that what they're going to hear from me is, okay, if you want to add a position, where are you going to get the resources to do it? Because we're not just going to keep adding more and more people. And if you can work in that mindset, it helps to make the place healthy. And we think that way both in good times and bad, not just when we're in crisis. And that is to a great extent why we're successful from a budgetary perspective.
And I want to build on that a little bit, because
Thank
there's
you,
a 15th budget, which is the budget of the Office of the Chancellor, which we're also needing to be mindful of. So just to give you the numbers that are in my head, I think there are 26 or 27 of us who are, we get one half of 1%. So our budget's $8.5 million. There's 27 of us in the Office of the Chancellor. The rest, it's about 137 others. 18 of them are lawyers, so they're kind of a shared service because they're your lawyers. And then the rest of that 136 or so are in shared services. So there's a big chunk of folks, 136 folks, who are basically providing services to the universities, billed to you, and now with our new shared services centers, responsible to the presidents as users, clients, and the rest of us, 27. So we're down 10% since I've been here.
Doing your fair share. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. No, it's important.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Emmy. I'm a higher ed student. This is my first time at a meeting like this, so I'm going to be fully transparent. Please work with me as I try to get my thoughts out. So what I'm hearing, the solution to all of this is student retention and getting students to increase student enrollment. with all of the turmoil that's going on right now in politics, and as Dr. Wozniak said earlier about, it's a very delicate time in politics, especially with higher ed and with education. Obviously, a solution would be to increase the funding. It sounds that easy. Obviously, we all know that it's not. So as I said, what I'm hearing the solution is to increase student enrollment. We know that there is an issue right now, especially with students of color and the retention rates. Are there going to be any measures taken or any programs that are going to be put in place to ensure that we do get students coming in and we have the students that come in that they are staying here for the full amount of time?
Okay. Are you a higher ed student, graduate level or undergraduate?
Graduate.
And what's the program exactly?
It's higher ed policy and student affairs.
It's the best place to be right now. Good for you. So I'll take it generally, and Chris, you might want to talk about the stuff that's going on here. So it's an enrollment-driven industry, and enrollments are critical. There's two ways to get them: new students that you don't currently attract, new markets, and then keeping the students you have. A lot of people would say I would be one of them. It's easier to actually keep the students you have than to go into new markets. So retention is a big deal. And because a growth area is non-traditional students, low-income students, students of color, first-gen students, attracting them and then doing really well with them internally, putting in place those programs, is not only the right thing to do for those students, but it's also financially a good thing to do for the university. So there's a big push on that. In fact, if you roll up our goals as a system, each university has multi-year goals. I think we're looking at a 1% per annum increase in student retention as a kind of a goal, and we're seeing, so I was at SHIP yesterday, they've improved their retention rates 5 points since 2016, from 70 to 75%. And it represents deliberate work to retain students, particularly in populations that have been challenging. There's some great work here, so I don't know if you
Sure.
want to
Well, you're absolutely right, and there are lots of anecdotes. Actually, the Chancellor referenced one earlier in his remarks. We had sessions between semesters where we identified not the students who are on probation. We already spend a lot of time trying to provide support for them, but the students who have acceptable GPAs, but they're still not in the high level of performance. And we brought a whole bunch of them in and worked with them on how they can improve their performance to be able to complete their goal. We've done a number of things. A couple of years ago, we took a look at students who were in good academic standing in the fall semester and then didn't schedule for classes in the spring semester. And we actually went and looked. We reached out to them and asked, why didn't you come back? And one of the things that was interesting that we found is that we impose fines on students for various things, parking in libraries, and if students had outstanding fines, they were not able to schedule. And we looked at that and thought, isn't that silly? Here we are driving a student away if they don't have the money to pay for that fine. So we set up a fund, and basically anybody who owed us less than $1,000, we just said, don't worry about it, come back. And we saved a good chunk of students by doing that. So there are lots of things going on. I think that talking about the Shippensburg example, when you really start thinking about retention, and when you get to the point, our retention refers specifically to students returning from the first year to the second year. And our retention rate as an institution is 86 or so percent, which is high. We would love it to be 90%. A school like Villanova, they have a higher retention rate than we do, and we're always striving to be better, because if we can retain them, that's great. The graduation rate, same thing. We're looking at the impediments to success, and you can get to a certain level, and then to get above that level, then you're looking at a whole array of smaller problems. Are people dropping out because they've run out of financial aid 10 credits before graduation? We have something here called the Fund to Finish, where, matter of fact, I just wrote a thank you note to a donor yesterday who contributed to that, because our alumni are paying it forward, are making resources available so that we can support students so they don't drop out a few credits from graduation because they ran out of money. So it's a whole bunch of things like that that are going on, and not just here, but obviously Shippensburg and at the other campuses, because if we can retain them, it is a lot a lot easier than having to go out and get a new student to replace them. So that is absolutely on our radar at a very high level.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So I'm looking at the time and realizing it's 11:28, so I'll try to be brief. My name is Amy Baker. I am in the Department of Sports Medicine and the new program director for the physician assistant program. I'm coming at a slightly different perspective because unlike my colleagues in biology and kinesiology who've been here for years, this is the end of my second week. In fact, your memo came out the week before I came on campus. And I'm coming from Jefferson, formerly Philadelphia University, so things like integration and merger make me feel some sort of way. But we can talk about that another time. Hopefully that's not a conversation that needs to be had. So as a program director of a brand new program that is yet to be accredited, and while I've had some assurances from my dean, I am curious what reassurances you could offer to the students and to the faculty that I'm about to recruit, that the resources and the facilities and the investment in them as faculty and students is going to be initiated for a successful launch of this program, as well as maintained at an institutional level.
I'll just handle that. We would not be launching this program if we didn't have that commitment. We've gone through many, many accreditations. We know what we're walking into. We're not going to bring students into this place and not get them through to accreditation. So I guarantee you we will do whatever is necessary to get that done. And we need you all to do your part.
Excellent. And I do understand that the program had been put on hold at one point as you came on to make sure that that dedication was actually in place. But how do I answer students and faculty when they say that, other than reiterating those words?
Repeat what the president just said.
That we wouldn't do it if we weren't serious about it. We can't mess with students that way. We can't bring them in here, have them spend years and money, and not follow through and make sure that we have the accreditation. I was the dean when we launched the Masters in Social Work, and it was the same thing, and there was a lot of pressure because we were bringing them in, and they were not going to be licensed unless we got the accreditation. Failure was not an option. Failure here is not an option.
Excellent. I feel the same way. Thank you.
And just to you and the woman who spoke before you, to me, this is the most exciting time to be in higher education. I mean, these problems are real, but the opportunities for innovation and growth and expanding student opportunity are phenomenal. Never been better. I mean, it's exciting. Welcome.
We done?
Giving the hook.
I'm getting the signal. Well, thank you all for being here today. Dan, thank you for spending your time.